Hello, everyone. This is Neha Pellegrino, Senior MSP Compliance Counsel, and I wanted to take a moment to welcome you to our very first episode of the ECS on MSP podcast. As you all know, ECS is dedicated to assisting you navigate all the complexities of MSP compliance, but we believe that compliance shouldn't be static. The rules evolve, technology evolves, and the way people consume information evolves, which is what led us here. While we've been continuing to connect with you through our monthly webinars, which we love providing, we recognize that this industry moves really fast, and so do the professionals working in it. So the idea behind the podcast is about meeting you where you are by delivering content in a way that fits your schedule. And we're really excited to have this be a part of our ongoing commitment to share knowledge and support you. Each episode will bring you practical insights and real-world discussions, all in a format that's easy to listen to and easy to learn from, almost like you're sitting on the couch in our office. So whether you're here to stay compliant, deepen your understanding, or just hear from the voices that live and breathe this work every day, you're in the right place. That being said, let's get started. Let's get started into today's rundown. The agenda for today is we're going to start with civil money penalties, roll right into work comp MSA reporting, assessing your program, and then we're going to round out by talking about some frequent questions that have been flooding our inbox regarding these topics. Okay. All right. So CMP rundown. So October 11th, again, we're talking about the final rule, right? So the final rule, which became effective October 11th, 2024. So now we're 1 year out. Again, we're looking at civil money penalties being applied for cases which have been reported at least 1 year late. So that's kind of where we are now. The flip has switched, if you will, on this ticking time bomb that we have been kind of highly anticipating. But an important aspect here is, kind of when you pull the curtain back on, why does CMS care, really, right? So the purpose of reporting is for the coordination of benefits. So that kind of moves us into our next topic, which is, it seems ironic that Medicare has placed this emphasis on timeliness over accuracy, because the CMPs, the penalty really is in regards to not reporting timely. So we know the impact of, not reporting timely in terms of penalties, but the question remains, like, what is the impact of reporting inaccurate information? And it would seem that the impacted party really would be the beneficiaries themselves, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, in the sense that there is this sort of randomness in the way in which the audits will work, right? So they're going to be pulling 250 claims per quarter through a random audit to determine whether or not those claims were, reported timely. We do have safe harbors that, are in effect, 3 specific ones. The first being to, report timely, which is self-explanatory. But the other 2 are really interesting, because I think that they lend themselves to some pretty interesting defenses coming down the line. One being where the non-compliance was due to a change made by CMS within the last 6 months of the incidence of non-compliance. So given that this is such a new rule, and, we've seen what happens when, there are a number of iterations that come out when new rules come down, I can definitely see this being something where, REs there could be some misinterpretation or misunderstanding of what the rules are, and then the non-compliance could be in regards to that. And that could essentially, keep you under the parameters of safe harbor there. The third safe harbor being that what we refer to as the 2-in-1 rule, right? So this is where there's a failure to report timely due to a lack of cooperation in obtaining the identifying information after a good faith effort. So, in order to report, you'd run the query in order to determine your beneficiaries and those claims that need to be reported. But, we all know that when you run the query, we need the big 5. And sometimes it requires reach out to get that information. So what constitutes a good faith effort to get that information? Medicare has said 2 reach outs via mail, whether it be email or snail mail, and 1 through some other means that they've said. It could be phone call or what have you. So reaching out 2 and 1, documenting that, and keeping your good faith effort to obtain information in order to um, identify those beneficiaries that and those claims that need to be reported should land you right under that safe harbor rule as well.
Well, I wanted to just come back to what you were saying too
Sure.
about the safe harbor and the CMP amounts. And then one of the things that we had wanted to talk about too was just the totally random bad luck of being penalized, and sort of like we've talked a lot about how it can be like being struck by lightning. You're looking at 250 claims that are going to be looked at in 1 quarter by Medicare total. And that that 250 claims, it includes, group health, it includes liability, it includes no fault, it includes workers' comp. So the odds of your one claim that was a little bit late being reported and being caught by CMS is really low. But I think that in aggregate, if you think about if an adjuster is handling, every adjuster who's on this line is handling, I'm sure, more than 100 claims. Those 100 claims, right, the odds of any one of those claims being a Medicare beneficiary are basically 1 in 10 probably. And then it's that 1% of 1% of 1% of 1% makes it unlikely. So just bad luck if you are in fact penalized, but the key is making sure that you're on top of it as if you were being penalized, as if you were being penalized. So I don't know if you covered that, Neha. I'm sure you probably already did, but that to me is the thing that is the most like, critical piece of this is you just have to act as if every single one of these cases will be penalized. So you want to be on top of it and treating it as if, Medicare is looking over your shoulder when you're in your claim system. Basically, that's just think about it like that. You've got Medicare right over your shoulder every single time. And I don't know if you covered that, Neha, but that was the one thing that I thought was the most
Yeah.
important piece of this. And then certainly too, the other thing I wanted to just make sure is, you know, I don't know, you probably gave your opinion about timeliness or accuracy.
Yes.
I'm gonna
I
tell you all
do.
my opinion. My opinion is 100% that it's really important to be timely, right? And so that timely is long, right? So you have up to a year to report the claim. So it's up to a year to report ORM, up to a year to report the TPOC. So take your time with it for sure in terms of the rightness of being accurate, but at the
Mhm.
same time, you're not penalized for missing an ICD code, as you probably said. You're not
Right.
penalized for the fact that, the representative wasn't listed and there was an attorney on file. You're penalized for the fact that you missed that TPOC, you missed that ORM. You're not even penalized for late reporting of ORM termination. The penalty is the fact that the beneficiary is going to keep calling you and saying, hey, how come my medical treatment is being delayed or screwed up? So certainly the most important thing is just getting that information in timely when it comes to a settlement or when it comes to initial report of ORM.
Right. Yeah, Marty, I did, brush upon that, but I also talked about sort of the irony of that in the sense that, you know, um, timeliness is sort of held to a higher standard than accuracy. And what really, we know what
Right.
the penalty is for not being timely, but what really is going to be the impact of not reporting accurately? And it seems like the most impacted party is going to be the beneficiary themselves. I don't know if you agree with that.
Absolutely. It is the
Yeah.
beneficiary ultimately, especially when it comes to denied care.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, unless there's anything else you want to touch upon, I think we can move down the rundown to, yep, work comp MSA reporting. So um, yeah, there's, I mean, another hot topic and also another newly implemented rule by CMS. But I think we would obviously be remiss to be talking about Medicare without discussing the current government shutdown and the implications that this has had on the work that we do. So as we know, this all came to a head on the 1st of this month, which also happened to be the day that CMS was slotted to hold a highly anticipated webinar. Um, which was to provide some much needed guidance to the entire industry regarding the MSA reporting process and, kind of what we've seen. So what's currently happening now? I mean, Marty, you can enlighten us, but it doesn't seem like much, right?
That's right. I mean, there's not much happening, obviously, with regard to the shutdown, and who knows how long it's going to go for. We're not the pontificators for that, but where it's impacting us is definitely in the ability to get answers from CMS. And Neha, we wrote this really good article. We collaborated. Well, I thought it was good, so we'll just pat ourselves in the back a little bit. We collaborated on this article that was released on November, on I think it was on October 1st or 2nd this
Yeah,
month, where we talked about what are the questions that we want CMS to answer. We're still waiting.
right.
Um, One thing that we did, one sort of like breaking news item that we did want to kind of mention here is that it did come out today that the HHS folks will be required to come back into office starting, I think it is next week, regardless of being paid or not. So all of the furloughed CMS employees will be back next week. So that should, even without with the shutdown, that should speed up some of the answers that we've been waiting for. But again, they were going to do that town hall call on the 1st. That's going to be pushed out for a few weeks for sure. Then they were going to update the user guide in response to that to deal with many of the same problems that we're having with WCMSA reporting. Not happening at the moment. So we don't know how it's going to impact the timeline, but that is some good news, I guess, for folks on this call, because we're going to be less impacted, hopefully, by the shutdown on a go forward basis starting next week.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so the next topic we have on there is the sort of optional field. So we all know that, when you're reporting MSAs, there's the up to five required data fields, that being the MSA amount, the MSA period. And so, the MSA period usually aligns with the life expectancy of the claimant. I say usually because there are certain jurisdictions where there's limitations on that. Off the top of my head, Georgia being one of them, where the MSA period is not going to align with the life expectancy of the claimant. It's going to be limited. There's a 400-week cap in that state, but that would align with how many years the MSA would be funded out, right? So you have amount, MSA period, how it'll be administered, again, lump sum or structured. And if it is structured, they're going to want the initial payment, as well as those, annuitized yearly payments. So two optional fields that we've seen, right? One being the case control number, or CCN. So when you go ahead and submit your MSA to CMS, different process, right? We're talking about reporting MSAs. When you submit your MSA to CMS, you will get a decision back. The decision will have essentially a serial number, which is the CCN number. If you would like to include that number when you report the MSA, you can go ahead and include that. That's optional. The other optional field we kind of have an asterisk on, because we've seen some interesting things occur here. So it's whether or not the MSA will be professionally administered seems to be an optional field. What we've seen in the industry is that if it's not filled in, it ends up being tracked in the working file as being self-administered. Is that right, Marty? Yeah. So they want the EIN number, which is essentially the tax ID number for the professional administrator that you're utilizing. So optional, we're using optional in quotes because if you are aware that you're using a professional administrator, you have that EIN number, we're imploring you to include that until we hear otherwise, because we are seeing that they're defaulting to self-admin where that's not being filled in. And again, impact there, the impact is going to be on the beneficiary, because when CMS is looking at how these are being funded and they're not seeing that it's being funded the way that it was, tracked in the working file, there's going to be questions that are going to arise. Anything else on that I missed, Marty?
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely the thing that is important there is that optional piece of this is that's how it's listed in the user guide, right? It says in the user guide that it's optional, and it doesn't say that it's required, it's applicable, which is what it would say in the way that Medicare previously would describe, some situational fields. The term optional here is the term of art, right? So if Medicare wants you to report the professional administration EIN, and then they label the field as optional, that means you don't have to report it. There's no consequence to reporting it. There's no consequence to not reporting it. and it can't do any, it can't help in any way. So they shouldn't be editing those fields. They shouldn't be taking action on their end. Medicare shouldn't be taking action on their end with respect to optional fields. It's as simple as that. That's been the way that things have worked in this area for the last 15, 16 years. With that being said, it is quite possible that CMS could change the label on that field in the upcoming user guide, which we anticipate now probably within the next, 4 to 6 weeks. Now, if they do in fact change the that field to make it more required than optional, then you would still have about 6 months before that became applicable, given the way that Medicare has in the past dealt with changes like that, right? So that's a big deal. The other thing is too, it's optional, right? So the impact is on the professional administration company, unfortunately, right, who is trying to get the claim administered and can't. The impact to the reporting entity is not, there's no impact to the reporting entity. There's no penalty impact to the reporting entity. The only impact is post-settlement for the beneficiary in the professional administration organization. It can be something that they can do relatively simply to get themselves listed on that file, but is it a pain for them? 100%. So to the extent that the data can be reported, our recommendation is to try to make that happen. But at the same time, if it can't be reported or won't be reported for whatever reason, there's no Section 111 penalty impact that you're going to see.
Great, great. Thanks, Marty. So our next bullet here is in regard to post-settlement letters. And, we've been really vocal about what we've seen. And, a lot of other folks have seen these letters come through, referred to as notice of settlement letters. So this is where CMS is communicating directly with the beneficiaries after an MSA has been reported, letting them know that they're aware of settlement, they're aware of a work comp MSA. It will give them instructions on how to fund their MSA. There's even an FAQ at the end of these letters, which describes what an MSA is for some beneficiaries that don't know what it is. So this isn't something entirely new. It's something newer given the process that has unrolled since April. But we have been seeing a little bit of a twist on these, which I know, Marty, you were actually able to see one in person where they're adding additional information to some of these letters, right?
That's right. So one of the big challenges, and we'll actually, Adrian, I can advance to slide one. We can show it to everybody who's able to see this. And if you're sort of just listening along, we'll tell you that basically the communication that's to beneficiaries that's listed in the WCMSA reference guide right now currently omits any reference to any MSA amount. There's no reference. It just says we received information, notice of a settlement that includes a WCMSA on your claim. That's it. This is the letter that goes to a beneficiary. What's changing about these letters now is that it's specifically on page 2, I believe it is, listing a specific amount in these cases, and it's the amount that was reported by the RRE, right? So it isn't the amount that's listed in your settlement document necessarily, and I'll tell you why that is in a moment. If your report that you send in or that you transmit to Medicare differs in any way, could be because of a typo, because of some material reason, why there was a difference between the amount that's listed in the approval amount versus what's listed in your settlement amount versus what you actually set aside. All those things get, if to the extent that they're any different, what Medicare is going to focus on with this particular letter is what you report to them or transmit to them via Section 111. So if you make a mistake, if you report $10 instead of $10,000, if you report $1 million instead of $14,000, that is going to be listed here. Whatever is transmitted is going here. So that's why it makes really a lot of sense here. From an accuracy perspective, we go back to that same question we had last rundown, right? Is accuracy or timeliness? This is where accuracy is important. Why? Because if the beneficiary has something that's off in this letter, that's going to be a problem for you, because they get this letter after settlement. The last thing you want is them going to their lawyer and trying to upset the apple cart on your previously approved settlement. That's what you don't want to have happen. So this is why it's so important to make sure that You measure twice, cut once, make sure that it's an accurate number. So it's like if you look at this right underneath section 3 here, that's basically the area where you see that amount. We go back one slide and look at that last topic here too on WCMSA. This is our big one, right? Right, Neha? Where is this all going?
Mhm.
Where is CMS going with this information? What are they going to do with it? More importantly, what are some of the things that we can think of that they could do with it? So I actually want to turn this back over to you. Where are we going with this? What are we doing here? Why are they asking for this information that has absolutely nothing to do with, Section 111 reporting as we've always historically known it?
Yeah, sure. And so again, it all comes back to coordination of benefits, right? So they want to know exactly what's going on. They've always been aware, of TPOC, but we've seen sort of this increase in non-submit MSAs, right? And so the industry was kind of like, well, they're allowing for these to happen, but you're saying that you want to coordinate benefits, but you're not actually tracking what's going on with these non-submit allocations, even though they're in regards to Medicare beneficiaries. And so the talk is that this is a way to capture that as well, right? Because where you have either non-submit MSAs or where you have an MSA which is maybe under the review threshold. Again, we're talking about two separate avenues here. We're talking about submitting an MSA to CMS for review so they're aware of it. And we're talking about reporting your MSA with your Section 111 reporting. So now that reporting part is going to be mandatory. There's no threshold there. This way they can capture all of that information. That's sort of the talk that we've been hearing sort of in the industry, as far as this is their way of sort of capturing everything. um, the real question remains is, again, what are they going to do with this?
Right, exactly. Where are they going in terms of what are they going to do with it? The actions and the activities that they're undertaking here. Like, I mean, all right off the bat, they said that they weren't going to do anything, and then they started making edits on the back end to the data that was being received. They're relying upon the data that we submit or transmit to them via Section 111 to take some small action in terms of the way they're communicating to beneficiaries, and some small action in terms of the way that they may be sort of upsetting the apple cart on previously submitted cases. So it's it who knows where they could go from here. Certainly, we would ask that they get it all straightened out before they take any further action, right? Let's just get it all straightened out. Let's get them back, hopefully, behind their desks and able to communicate with us in a way that will be helpful and will be very transparent for the entire community, and instead of just communicating with some small interest groups. So um, it's really important that the entire community understand what's going on and they can take action as needed. So I think now we can go on to that next topic. We're going to be talking about assessing compliance and staying penalty free. So um, certainly there's multiple different perspectives here when it comes to penalties. Civil money penalties, like I said, I should say, like Neha said, while I was dealing with my Nixon tape situation, uh, this is a really important time to take stock of your program. These penalties are live. Claims that are reported now could potentially be late, right? So from the TPA perspective, uh, you're responsible for making sure that your clients are having their claims reported timely and accurately, right? So, and you want to make sure that your program is ready to be assessed by multiple different organizations. It's not just, your organization that's responsible for reporting on behalf of everybody else, but those those organizations, those organizations are going to be coming to you and asking you, hey, what can you do to prove to me that you've done this the right way? What can you do to ensure that your processes and policies and procedures are all up to snuff? And so, Neha, one of the things that I think that we've seen when it comes to TPA certainly is that they really have to be, malleable is not maybe the right word, but they have to have the ability to be somewhat interchangeable in terms of the way they talk to one RRE to another RRE, and really depends upon the type of organization that they're dealing with. And so I guess the question that I have for you is, as we've worked with a lot of different TPAs over the course of the last couple of years, as they've been getting ready for penalties, and seeing this, have you seen any like sort of trends or thoughts around the ways that maybe a TPA might be looking at this different from, the actual responsible reporting entity?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sure, but and I think a lot of it too is just a need for clarity on a lot of these cases. Sometimes we have claims where maybe there's multiple claims involved or there's multiple dates of injury, and there really hasn't been any written guidance there. And so not just TPAs or RREs, but the industry as a whole are seeking answers because we've heard everything from you know, um, report the same amount for all claims, to report the earliest date of injury, to report the primary claim only. And I think, everyone is kind of wondering what they should do or what action they should take in regards to sort of situations like these where there's really no written guidance in terms of
Mhm.
where to go from there.
Yeah, and so like when you're the RRE and you flip the script, and you might be, if you especially if you have unbundled claims that are with a TPA somewhere, you might be looking at it in a totally different light where you might be saying, hey, well, I want to make sure that all of the TPAs that we work with or this particular TPA is dealing in a certain way. The TPA is hearing three different, for every RRE that it deals with, it's got a different set of guidelines that it has to follow. So the RRE is looking at it the other way, say, hey, I want to make sure that my claims are reported in the way that I need them to be reported. That's going to be different from company to company, certainly, so that we're seeing. From an RRE's perspective, certainly, we always would recommend, hey, make sure that there's enough awareness of whoever it is who's responsible for reporting your claims, whether it's a TPA, whether it's your own people, for what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it, and then how they're going to achieve that goal. And then make sure that on the back end, that you have some way to look down and see, did we achieve these goals in this particular quarter? Did we achieve these goals over the course of this year? The goals aren't really about settlement when it comes to compliance. It's about making sure the claims get reported in a timely manner.
Right. I mean, it almost seems like these situations would lend themselves back to one of the safe harbors. I don't know if you agree with that, in the sense that the non-compliance and reporting could come directly down to misinterpreting, rather the lack of communication from CMS. And so it's really important, if you are hearing sort of the different manners in which these types of claims should be reported, to perhaps maybe stick with one, go down that route and kind of say, this is how we interpreted it, and this is what we did. And if they were to come back, you're showing a good faith effort, in the sense that you're going ahead and trying to timely report these claims. I don't know if you agree with sort of.
Yeah, 100%. And exactly, like when I'm looking at that question, I think that's one of it's sort of like a preview of our Q&As, but we definitely get that question a lot, which is, hey, I never heard from this person. I never heard from that person. I can't tell you how many times we've dealt, meaning the beneficiary, right? Or maybe the beneficiary. We don't know, right? We haven't heard back from them to get their social security number. So I can't tell you how many times I still get that question about, well, in this particular case, we want to go ahead and settle it. This person's a certain age. We still don't know what their status is. Well, and if you've asked it the right number of times and you've done so in the right number of ways, then you're good. And there is some level of confidence that you have to be able to have and trust that your process is strong. Speaking of which, so I just want to touch on this comment about aggregated reporting for large RREs, right? So when we're talking about assessing compliance and staying penalty free, some large RREs out there, meaning large insurers or large self-insurers, may be reporting across multiple different TPAs, right, that are responsible ultimately for doing their Section 111 reporting. When that's happening, when we see that, and their ECS is one of the organizations that will sort of take claims from multiple different data sources and then pull them into our system and report them under one separate RRE, one single RRE. So in those circumstances where you do have an aggregated reporting agent like ECS, where we can aggregate claims across multiple systems and then report for you under one, then you are able to assess the relative, strengths and weaknesses of like the way that one TPA is handling it versus another TPA versus another TPA. And it may help in those circumstances to put resources or apply resources around knowledge, or apply as much as you can in terms of education to TPAs that you might think have challenges to get the data correct. With that being said, we want to apply a little bit of grace here, because this is certainly a dynamic time, right? And so, Neha, as you pointed out, like, we definitely are seeing that even within jurisdictions, there are challenges right now to getting settlements done quickly and promptly, because a lot of judges are sort of interpreting what is being said, right? And there were a lot of judges, and certainly claimants counsel we're seeing, are misinterpreting a lot of what's being said, especially around WCMSA reporting, and it's making it particularly challenging within some states. I don't know if you want to kind of comment a little bit on that. It's very hard to like think about, like, each state almost is its own little mini kingdom when it comes to this.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And there are particular, like you said, jurisdictions. Sometimes even within a state like California, we've seen certain regions. We know that there are certain regions where the judges are either much more conservative, and we're having issues with, whether it be non-submit MSAs, those type of things. But I do think that's where we're kind of seeing this resurgence of um, acceptance, in the sense that, we're not trying to no one's trying to hide this information anymore. When you have a Medicare beneficiary, even if your MSA is zero, we're reporting that amount, so they're going to come back and potentially want to see, what do you have to back that up.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so I wanted to kind of real quick touch on the oversight piece. So must do's on oversight, and then must do's on a day-to-day basis. And so first of all, I'm going to kind of cover a little bit the oversight, and then Neha's going to kind of go through the must do's on a day-to-day basis. But first question, or first thing I think about when I'm looking at it from a top-down perspective, is just making sure you're you're timely and accurately reporting claims. You don't have to be looking on a day-to-day basis, but the key time period for me, if I'm thinking about an RRE that has to report under one single RRE, is looking at the situation where it's within 2 weeks I have to report. So if I had to report my claims, for example, on November 1st, then within about the last, like, since about October 15th or so, that's where I'm going to really heavily focus my efforts to make sure that the data that I know needs to be reported is in fact being reported in this 2-week window, that the errors are being corrected, that the data is clean, that if I have a TPOC amount that is $50, that's not being reported, that it's being checked to see if there's an amount that should be reported. And then looking back retrospectively to make sure that once the data does get reported, that it all comes back with the information that I need. That in fact the files are being accepted. That we're not seeing a lot of situations where the data that's going in isn't really coming back as clean as we'd like it to. So that's my that's my oversight at a top-down level. But Neha, obviously, claim by claim, each claim is different. So on a day-to-day basis, when you're looking at all of the claims that are in front of you, and you think about Medicare looking over your shoulder, what are some tips that you can think of for the group listening?
Yeah, so I think, as far as day to day, when you're looking at a particular claim, I think it's just good to kind of look at that claim overall holistically, right? We have three buckets that we need to look at every time. And so if you do have a Medicare beneficiary, it's not just first one is, do I need an MSA? Everyone always says, do I need an MSA? No, but what you do need to do is you need to take Medicare's interest into account. And how can you do that? The vehicle to do that is by obtaining a Medicare set aside, so that you have an accurate and defensible number that you're putting forward for, your future medical component. So you're looking at, do I quote unquote need the MSA, even if it's, under a threshold or what have you. You also want to make sure that you're not ignoring conditional payments, right? Because a lot of the time we'll have files, well, it's a zero and it's denied, so there's no conditional payments, right? No, that's not the case. So you want to make sure that you're keeping that category open. You've been doing your, conditional payment lien searches, not to mention your, map lien searches. And then comes in the reporting aspect, right? What are you reporting? Make sure that you're not reporting prematurely, right? Because if you're just reporting the indemnity portion, that's not going to be an accurate TPOC. The TPOC needs to incorporate your future medical component. So those are the things sort of, if you want to really hone in on a day to day, you still need to kind of look at the file holistically in those three buckets.
Absolutely. Now that last one, canaries in the coal mine, this is a phrase that I've used for the last 15 years when it comes to Section 111 reporting. You can always find canaries in the coal mine in your data. And so some of the things that you want to look at would be, is your organization trying to report, or people in your organization trying to report claims settlements that are less than $750, for example, if they're even capable of doing so? Are you reporting claims with workers' compensation claims with lots of TPOCs or settlements, but no ORM termination on those same claims? Um, are you reporting claims prematurely, right? So are you reporting ORM on liability claims, things like that? These are some of the basic things that you can look at to say, wait a second, I want to make sure that our team is properly trained, because if you're not reporting, if you're reporting claims like that, then that leads now down to something else, right? We see that leads on the work comp claim side, that can lead to situations where you're reporting obviously an MSA amount. So those little canaries in the coal mine from a reporting perspective can lead to big problems after the fact once the data goes into CMS. So be careful about that. Those are some ideas of things to check. And then Neha, obviously, in terms of canaries in the coal mine, we talked about this a little bit, but what are some of the things that you would start to see coming back from CMS, or some of the things that are coming back from a vendor that might be things to just watch for? Is like, hey, wait, or what are we doing? Are we doing the right things here if we're seeing a lot of something that we don't want to see? What are some of the things that you commonly see in that area?
Yeah, and I think right now, I think we touched upon this a little bit, is where we have those contingent settlements. I see that a lot now, because this was never really an issue prior to April of this year, where you can go ahead and submit an MSA to CMS while you're still, you know, while your settlement is pending. And so now what's happening is those MSAs are pending review. TPOC is being reported prematurely, and then they're pulling the plug on any CMS review. So, it's kind of,
Huge.
they're taking that MSA reporting aspect as gospel and saying, okay, well, this is what we're going to put in the common working file, and we've
That's
just
the big
closed review. Yeah,
that's
we
the
haven't
biggest
even
canary in the
gotten.
coal mine that there is.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
biggest
and
canary that there is in the coal mine right
it's
there. That's
it
telling you.
is concerning in the sense that we're not even getting notification when they are closing those files down. It's usually discovered once we're kind of like, hey, what's going on with that, and we're looking back into maybe checking on status, and then we're told, oh, this was closed out because it was reported, which is concerning.
I think we can move on to the Q&A section. The next one, these are some of our FAQs that we've been seeing, common questions that we see with, wow, I mean, there's a lot of them here. So, and we've got some good ones in the chat box too. So Neha, why don't we kind of walk through these? Will I get penalized for not reporting a resolved claim where I just learned that the claimant is now a Medicare recipient? So yeah, so if you just found out that the claimant's on Medicare, and up until the point of settlement, you had no knowledge that the person was on Medicare, and you've been querying that person, obviously, it's the key point is the point in time when the case settles. If the person became a Medicare beneficiary after settlement, no big deal. No big deal. If prior to the settlement, the person was a Medicare beneficiary and you never knew that they were a Medicare beneficiary because you could not gain the information that you needed, you couldn't get their social security number, for example, then you may have risk, right? You may have risk, but if you've followed the 2-in-1 rule, right? If you've sent 2 written communications and followed up with 1 electronic communication, and one of those 2 written communications was a U.S. mail letter, which utilized the model language that CMS puts out, you're good. You're not getting penalized for that. One question that we also get, sort of a sub question to this, is how are they going to find out to audit me? How are they going to penalize me if I never reported the claim in the first place? Because they're only auditing for late reporting, but if I never report the claim at all, then I'm good, right? Wrong. They find out, Medicare what Medicare adds to the list, in addition to Section 111 data that it gets, is it also gets self-reported information from beneficiaries and their attorneys. So when the attorney tries to contact Medicare to get the conditional payment amount, that goes into the list. If they find out later that that case settled from the attorney, and they don't find about the case settling from you, guess what? You're going to potentially hear about that. That's part of that auditing process. So it's really important to make sure, no matter what, if you have a chance to report that claim, report that claim. You know, our advice always is, even if you're 1 year late, report the claim anyway, because the penalties go up for 3 years, and the penalty gets really, really punitive, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you never report the claim at all. Next question, Neha, I'll turn
Great.
that next question over to you.
Yeah, sure. So the next question we get a lot is the difference between the threshold for submitting a work comp MSA and the threshold for reporting a workers' comp TPOC, right? So submitting an MSA, there is a threshold that CMS has. It's a workload threshold, right? So you're dealing with when you have a class one, which is a Medicare beneficiary, and you have a total settlement amount over 25,000. You have an MSA. That MSA is eligible for um, submission to be reviewed by CMS. Class two would be where you have the reasonable expectation of Medicare enrollment, and you have a total settlement over $250,000. That MSA would then be eligible for review. What is reasonable expectation? Anyone that's 62 and a half or older, anyone that has applied or applied denied, SSDI, or anyone that's been diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, given that that person will likely be receiving benefits in the near future. So that is the submission threshold for work comp MSAs. Again, a voluntary process, merely a workload threshold. It gives you the bracelet to enter. It doesn't mean you have to enter. It just is that workload threshold for submitting a work comp MSA to CMS for review. This differs from the threshold to report, work comp TPOCs, which is mandatory, right? You have to report via Section 111. The reporting threshold there, any TPOC over $750, most are, you're going to be reporting your TPOC there. And then now we know, as of April, not only do you report your TPOC, but you also report the MSA amount, regardless of whether that MSA was submitted for review. You report your MSA amount. Anything that I missed there or that you want to touch upon, Marty?
No, Neha, you nailed it. Honestly, that was good. I mean, these, and it's important, everybody, these are the questions that we get the most. You know, Neha and I sort of went through, and these are the top 4 questions that we've been getting. Certainly we have got a lot coming in the chat box too, and we're going to get to all those in a minute, but definitely we want to make sure we get these out too, because these are questions that probably everybody in the line has. That next one, I'll do the next one, and then Neha will do the last one. Next one
Sure.
is, when do you recommend that we stop a query on a claim or a group of claims? Are there any claims that should never be queried and or reported? So first question is, when do we recommend that we stop a query on a claim or group of claims? So you should be querying, because the way that the law really works is, you have to identify Medicare beneficiaries, and then once identified, report certain claim information. So when should you identify Medicare beneficiaries? When you have a reportable claim. So you don't have to continue to query claims when you will never have to report that claim. When would you never have to report that claim? When you have somebody who's not a Medicare beneficiary, whose claim is completely resolved for liability. So that means you settled the claim, you close it out, you've got a liability claim that's gone, and the person was, 28 years old. You don't have to report that claim. You'll never have to report that claim. You don't have to query that individual anymore. Claims that similarly involve, on the no-fault side, situations where the claim has been resolved and eliminated due to, for example, policy limits being reached. You've hit a $10,000 MedPay limit. You won't have to deal with that claim after the limit, right? On the comp side, you would not have to query certain types of of claims that are med-only claims that are resolved and closed, claims that fall within the 525 rule, where it's been more than 5 years of treatment and less than $25,000 of medical, and the claim will be closed and resolved, right? So the key thing is, you never want to see the claim ever again, so you're going to stop querying the claim. Now, are there claims that should never be queried and or reported? The only types of claims that should really never be queried sort of leads us to the next question, but the only types of claims that should never be queried and or reported are claims that don't involve medical, right? So if you have an injury claim, that should be being queried, because as long as it's open and it's an injury claim, it should be being queried. If it's not an injury claim, then you don't have to query it. So think about cyber, think about certain types uh, of like travel insurance and things like that. So accident, A&H claims, right? Accident health claims. Some A&H claims might never have to be reported, right? So just be mindful of that. There are those types of claims. If you ever have a question about it, you can pick up the phone, call me, call Neha, and we'll be happy to help you with that. Neha, last questions here for you, and then we're going to get to some of the questions in the chat box.
Sure. Yeah. So the last one here, the question is, how do I report a claim involving, I believe it should say economic damages only. Marty just touched upon that, where medicals are being released. So these are generally liability claims, right? That would fall under that no injury diagnosis, or, NOINJ diagnosis. Common example here being a claim for loss of consortium. So the answer to this is really that you don't need to report these types of claims, right? It's optional. So historically, these would be reported, which is likely where the confusion lies. We get questions surrounding this a lot, but the recent NGHP user guide, specifically section 6252, states that where liability record only meets the criteria for reporting the no injury diagnosis code, that the reporting of record is no longer required. It specifically says no longer required. It goes on to mention, however, it is optional for the RRE to report the record with the no injury diagnosis code following the previously existing user guide, right? So not required, but you can if you'd like to. That's sort of, what they're saying there. And I think,
And
yeah, good.
yeah, like I'd love to. Why not just pay taxes that I don't have to pay, right? Let's just throw an extra 20 bucks in there, right? So absolutely, it's optional. Optional means, of course, I'll do it, right? No, we're not reporting those claims for sure. Hopefully.
There you go.
All right,
Okay.
so Adriana, what do we have in the chat box? We've got some questions in the chat box. I don't know if you want to pick through a few and throw them out to us.
Thanks, Marty. Yeah, the first question is from Robert, and he asks, is a specific date of injury necessary for reporting purposes? Example, exposure or cumulative injury claims.
Yeah, so the first one is a specific date of injury is always necessary for Section 111 reporting purposes. And the user guide guidance is to utilize the date of first exposure, regardless of whatever your jurisdictional guidelines would be with regard to reporting that date of injury internally. So if you think about a state claim, state workers' compensation requirement to report, whatever the last date is, you're going to actually report the first date of exposure. So that's the key for that particular question is, you report the first date of exposure as the CMS date of incident.
Thank you. And the next question is from Tina. Will there be penalties for not terminating ORM timely?
Neha, do you want to do that one or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, really, I guess the penalty there would be the sort of rolling recovery that will come through in regards to conditional payments. What they're looking for is that you report when there is an acceptance of ORM. And so that's really where the penalty would lie, that didn't get reported timely. As far as terminating, there's no, specific civil money penalty for that, but I think that, the penalty would really be in regards to not sort of stopping the clock on any potential conditional payments that could continue to come through.
Thanks, Neha.
Sure.
And the next question is from Aline or Elaine. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Is the amount on the notice the value that was agreed upon per the CMS agreement?
So I think that what you're referring to here is the amount on that notice of beneficiaries. The amount that's listed on the notice of beneficiaries letter is going to be the amount that you report in the WCMFA field when you report that TPOC. So that's why it's so important to make sure that that amount lines up with your settlement agreement, because if it differs, the beneficiary could contact you later and say, hey, what gives? So you want to be 100% certain that you're making sure that the data is accurately reported.
Thank you. The next question is from Deborah. Are MSAs mandatory in liability settlements as opposed to workers' comp?
Yeah, I can take that. So, no, and again, MSAs are not mandatory in either, but you are required to take Medicare's interest into account. The MSA is the vehicle that does that. There really hasn't been any specific written guidance regarding liability settlements. So even if you were to get a liability MSA, CMS wouldn't review that MSA. So I'm not sure if that's sort of where we're going with that question, but always beneficial to sort of have an accurate read on what the future medical component is, whether you're dealing with a liability settlement or a work comp settlement. However, if you were to get a liability MSA, that would not be reviewed by Medicare.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Mary. If the claimant passed away and is a Medicare recipient, but they did not treat from the loss/accident, do we still have to report to Medicare?
Good question. So this depends upon the insurance type to a degree, but generally speaking, if for example, in workers' comp, the person would more likely than not, well, one question would be, has the claimant passed away as a result of the accident? If that's the case, then you're probably not having to report, you in fact don't have to report that claim. But if it's the case that the claimant has passed away post-accident and did not receive treatment from the loss or the accident, in comp, you wouldn't have to report that claim most likely, because of the fact that you're looking at a $750 medical charge $750 in medical in order for the claim to become reportable. So in comp, you probably wouldn't have to report it. In no fault, you may have to report the claim, but it really will depend upon whether the person's actually seeking any form of medical treatment. This is the type of case where it's too close to call in terms of, you really do need a little bit more information to be 100% sure.
The next question is from Patsy. Are agreed upon trials an acceptable way to resolve/address potential future medical? Example, the judge comments on future medical and states no future medical treatment is needed as relates to the workers' comp claim.
Yeah, sure. So I could take that. I'm not sure agreed upon trials. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but in the example that you stated, where you do have a work comp judge, which is who's making a ruling on the merits that there's no medical treatment needed, you could absolutely use that as a defensible backing, either to not include an entire body part or to not include, perhaps the particular condition in regards to that body part. So judges' orders, work comp orders are absolutely defensible to incorporate into your MSAs to sort of address future medicals.